Welcome everyone. This is Live Life Aberdeenshire Winter Wellbeing Mental Health Workshop. And as I was saying, this is part of a series of 4 weeks of workshops on winter wellbeing. And this one being at the end on mental health. And so we'll be taking a look at how to look after ourselves during the winter months. And so today, what we'll be taking a look at is what's happening when our mental health suffers and how to look after ourselves a wee bit better, given, not just the winter months, but, the situation that we're in just now with COVID-19, which really compounds isolation a wee bit more. Generally what I tend to do is when I start off, I give you a wee bit of introduction to maybe what's happening in our minds that can start off an alteration in our well-being, and provide a little bit of, how and why, because providing a little bit of, how and why can often be just as powerful as showing you how and when. And so I really believe that, if we understand what's going on there, then sometimes it's a lot easier to actually deal with it and do something about it. So the initial part of the workshop is very much about, letting you see, giving you a wee insight into what's happening when our mental health starts to alter and becomes unhelpful. So fundamentally, as human beings, actually, I haven't even done the introductory stuff yet. I need to remember to be putting the slides forward. So, sorry, my name is David Beedie, and I'm the Community Peer Facilitator with the My Life Dynamics service, which is the third sector mental health service that's been commissioned by Aberdeenshire Council. And so we would deliver probably what's called the sort of non-clinical mental health services. So we're kind of directly underneath the NHS. The NHS would deal with maybe clinical sort of interventions and more too. But we deal with, the way our service is built is that, we provide like counselling and coaching. And we also have a horticultural aspect to the service as well. Our service very much puts focus onto the person and not the condition. So we're very person-centered in that respect. And we're very much, we really believe that, anybody with any mental health condition and like all mental health conditions can be seen as being on a spectrum. So you can get mild, moderate, and severe. So we are of the belief that, anyone can work themselves towards being able to self-manage in some way their mental health conditions. And so we work with people to try and provide that, so we're based on principles of empowerment, resilience, and hope. And so everything that we do and any information we kind of put out there is always based around the belief that we're trying to help people to move towards that place. So fundamentally, as human beings, we're thinking conscious creatures. It's what makes us different from other animals. The power of our minds is what enables us to create, to talk, to do tasks, to work things out, to project ideas, and to live better lives, basically. But, our thoughts affect more than just our ability to achieve things. In a lot of ways, our thoughts act like stories or narratives, about us and about the world around us. And it's also, it's our ability to be aware of our thoughts that's what makes us special, what makes us different from everything else. Not just the fact that, that we have these thoughts, but the fact that we are aware that we have thoughts. And in many ways, it's like we have an internal dialogue with ourselves. It's kind of like a sports commentator on the radio, kind of describing to us what's happening on the field of play. And we experience this most obviously through like the ongoing dialogue that goes on in our minds. So sometimes this ongoing dialogue can be quite loud, and sometimes it can be quiet, but it's always happening. It's always there, whether we're aware of it or not. And further to that, when thoughts are combined with feelings, this then creates our experience of like our outer reality. It's how we interpret and navigate the external world around us. So, if our thoughts draw an outline of the picture, if that's what our thoughts kind of do, then our emotions kind of draw in the colors of what we experience, to put it a wee bit kind of metaphorically or allegorically. So, and that gives our experiences like meaning and substance and perspective. And it can be quite noticeable that, with new life experiences, our thoughts about our experiences can appear to be like fresh and new, especially with new life experiences. But, for the most part, the thoughts that we have and that we rely on to keep us out of harm's way are automatic and repetitive. And because they are automatic and repetitive, we become oblivious to the fact that we're having them. Over time and with repetition, this can also happen with the unhelpful thoughts that we have about ourselves, about our memories, maybe about our relationships and such like. And the aware or conscious part of our minds becomes oblivious to them. It's like that part of our minds kind of goes to sleep in a way. And once, you've been telling yourself a negative thing about you or about the world around you enough times, then, it can become your perspective. It can become how you see things. Those thoughts then become automatic and then become even harder to recognize when we're having that like silent conversation with them. And we very often can't help this from happening. This occurs because our brains and our nervous systems have been developed over hundreds of years to protect us from risks. So, back when we were hunter-gatherers, we developed this ability to help keep us safe. This seeing the world as a place of risk is what is called a negativity bias. Our minds have a tendency to fall on the side of negative because it helps protect us from risk and danger, because the brain needs food and energy and rest in order to function well. It's also developed the uncanny skill of taking shortcuts to help try to keep it working at optimum capacity. So, for efficiency, our minds store our most repetitive thoughts into the compartment that uses automatic functions, for the good ones and the more unhelpful ones. And once thoughts become automatic, we kind of become oblivious to the fact that we're even having them on a regular basis. And the more regular that we have a thought, the more ingrained in our brains it becomes. This is something that's called neuroplasticity, and I'll go on and kind of explain that a wee bit later. So, maybe if you think about, things that you do on a daily basis or on a regular basis that you can do without even having to think about them. So an obvious example is, driving a car. So, for anyone who's ever learned to drive a car before, at the start, you're very nervous and you're really clunky, and you've got to pay attention to a lot of different things at once, and your reactions aren't that quick because it's really overwhelming. But after you've been driving for a few years, you can drive 50 miles without even thinking about the fact that you're changing gears or looking in the mirror or using the pedals. We can do these things like automatically, and this is how the brain, it's how it remains efficient. It learns how to do things automatically. So we do things over and over, and eventually we don't have to think about doing them as much. So the brain relies mostly on automatic responses because those are what uses up the least energy for it. The brain is a really kind of smart sort of computer. It's in its own way, you know, it knows how to look after itself, even, you know, despite us and the way we treat it and what goes on. And you know, I guess if you consider things like self-will, the brain still has this capacity for survival. But, you know, I guess in the modern world, you know, we don't need to rely on this negativity bias so much because, you know, we're not so much at risk from the external world. We don't have to fend off saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and stuff. But, you know, still this negativity bias can dominate our way of being because it's you know, it's ingrained in us. It's the whole fight, flight, or freeze response that we have. This is exactly what it is. And so when it's not put to use at protecting us from the outside world, you know, it affects how we interpret our inner worlds, or it can. Our inner dialogues have a tendency to interpret our experiences negatively. And this affects us most obviously in our thoughts, the ones about the actions we do, about the world around us, but also at times with the ones about ourselves and our experiences. So I'm going to show you, you know, how these thoughts might start to alter our lives. So, you know, as we go through life, we naturally experience challenges. You know, everyone does. No one's immune to, you know, to not dealing with these kind of things. And these challenges, you know, it's the stories that we attach to these experiences that can really determine how well or not so well that we deal with them going forward. You know, I guess this capacity or this skill can be described as our resilience. You know, if we can get through these experiences and these challenges and get past them, and, you know, they don't follow us into our present, then, you know, our lives are easier. But, you know, it's when the stories we attach to these things become really meaningful and important for us that these events can follow us into our ongoing lives. So just to kind of put this in context, I try and stay away from as much kind of clinical language and clinical. I really try and explain this stuff as kind of as simply and relatably and down to earth as I can. But sometimes I need to venture into, you know, kind of explaining the theories behind, you know, our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. So, you know, thankfully we can do something about, you know, these thoughts and where they can lead us. So I wonder if it's ever occurred to you that not only do you have thoughts, but, you know, that you can actually talk back to those thoughts. And so these kind of practices allow us to start, you know, trying to be a little more aware of what's going on. I guess building that part of our minds that allow us to become more aware of what's going on with that in our dialogue. But generally what happens is, so we might have an activating event. So, you know, something might happen to us from some sort of external factor, or, you know, maybe someone says something to you, and that situation or that, you know, event might start off a thought. It will alter your thinking in some way. So it might be, you know, you might have the thought that, well, they don't like me, or, you know, I must be useless, or I'm not worth the bother. You know, generally it's some sort of negative story, you know, that we attach. And then once we have a thought like that and it becomes meaningful for us, it will alter our feelings. And so these are the emotional feelings I'm talking about. So, you know, we'll feel maybe rejected or ashamed or worried or sad. And then once we feel that way, and once we feel that on an ongoing basis for long enough, that will then affect how we feel physically. And the physical feelings I'm talking about are like stress, nausea, anxiety, and feelings like butterflies for worry. And then once we're feeling those kind of feelings, a combination of all those things can really alter our behavior. They can dictate how we behave next. And that could be that, we tell ourselves that we can't be bothered going to work, or maybe we start isolating from family and friends, or we miss appointments that we have that, will be really beneficial for us. And once we act out in those behaviors, that again creates another round of the thinking. So not, changing our behavior will then create more thoughts that are, in some way negative towards ourselves and the situation. And that just gets impounded. And then we fall into what's called the vicious cycle. So this theory, was brought about and then applied to something called cognitive behavioral therapy, so CBT. And what they also recognized during their investigations into the mind and, how thoughts lead to feelings and feelings can change behavior was that not only do we have thoughts, but we can have certain unhelpful styles of thinking. So maybe we take things way too personally, or maybe we believe that everything that's wrong in the world is because of us, or something that we did, or something that we thought. But generally, we have ways of thinking that are very unhelpful for us. And so, building this awareness of our minds and our thoughts and our thinking can, really help us break this cycle. It can help us, I guess, reverse the cycle. But it's a real skill, to become more aware of, the thoughts that we're having, especially when those thoughts are repetitive, habitual, ingrained. If you've been having a negative thought about yourself or about your situation for weeks or months or years, there's a really good chance that you don't even recognize that you're having it. In fact, it's happening so quickly that all it feels to you like is a feeling, or maybe a feeling of impending doom, or a feeling of anxiety. But what sets off that feeling is actually a thought. So the more aware we can be of the thoughts that we're having and do something about them, the better our toolbox for being able to do something about our mental dialogues. So, what makes us different from every other species on the planet is that we have this capacity to be self-aware. We have this capacity to build self-awareness. And it's this ability and skill to be self-aware that can help us deal with our unhelpful habitual thoughts. This ability also, and probably more powerfully, helps us to alter the relationship that we have with and toward our thoughts and our thinking. This is like the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to change the relationship that we have with our inner dialogues, change the relationship that we have with the stories that dictate our lives day in, day out. So what can you do to do that? So the key to maintaining well-being, not just physical well-being, not just, our emotional well-being, but, for our mental health as well, is about taking actions, taking regular actions. For the most part, any problem can't be solved by doing nothing. Some can. That's not, a general rule, but generally when it comes to, dealing with our mental healths, our problems take some sort of, proactivity on our part. Getting well and staying well takes effort, and it doesn't happen by itself. So, we need to do regular tasks that keep us well. And so to do that, we need to, have a well-stocked and varied box of tools available to us, because maintaining good mental health isn't just about tending to our inner mental and emotional lives. As we'll see, it's about maintaining good mental health relies on, many other different externally focused practices. And we'll go on and we'll have a look at things like, the 5 ways to well-being. And these are probably more important for us to do on a regular basis with what's going on today, with the COVID situation, but also more importantly during the winter months where, as humans, we tend to enter into a more sedentary lifestyle. We do less to save energy, we maybe eat more, we become a wee bit more passive. So let's take a look at what we can do to maintain a healthy mind. So the first tool, especially in relation to, the whole idea about tending to our thoughts, with the understanding of, this theory of CBT with our thoughts, feelings and behaviors, is trying to develop self-awareness. And we do this because trying to deal with our minds, only using our minds, it's really difficult for us to see what's going on there. It's really difficult for us to have a productive conversation with our minds without our minds dominating, that conversation and taking it like down rabbit holes, or leading to us, learning helplessness. And a great way that we can do that is by writing. Writing is a tool that I quite often use with my own well-being maintenance. And I quite often think of a piece of white paper as like being a mirror that I can hold up to myself, a mirror that allows me to see what's going on in my mind and the kind of conversations that I can have with myself. And so when I start writing about the kind of thoughts that are going on in my head, I become more aware. And then at that point, it starts to put me more in control of which thoughts that I can then maybe choose to feed into, or which thoughts that I can choose to leave alone. And this takes a wee bit of practice. All these tools are kind of ongoing, progressive sort of tools. So as a simple way to start off, if you're new to doing any kind of like self-reflective investigation, so journal writing and diary writing is a really great place to start off. We would like to be able to get to the point where we know ourselves really well. We know how we react to things. We know how, what kind of feelings come up when we're in certain situations, or what kind of feelings come up, when we have certain kinds of thoughts. And we would like to, arrive at that kind of level of self-awareness, but that can take a wee bit of time and effort. So a great place to start off, if this isn't something that you do on a regular basis, is just start writing about the things that you see around you, your experiences on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't have to be anything really insightful. It's just about getting us to start this practice of writing, and writing so that it develops our self-awareness. So journaling and diary writing are great ways that we can start this off. And so as these go on, they get a wee bit, I guess, a wee bit more progressively in depth. So the next one on the road kind of down to more emotional and mental awareness would be like gratitude lists. So the idea with a gratitude list is that, you take maybe 15, 20 minutes and you think of 3 things that you're really grateful for having in your life, and things, that really have a positive impact on you, that make your life a bit easier in some sort of way. But it's not just about listing these things. It's about really taking the time to reflect on them, and reflect on how they make you feel as well. Because the thing about the feeling of gratitude is that it's one of those feelings that can be nurtured. And it can be nurtured by putting reflection and focus on it. So if you spend 5 or 10 minutes, really feeling how having something positive in your life makes you feel, then you can create these feelings. And I'm not sure about anyone else, but I know, when I'm struggling mentally, it can often feel as though I'm like a victim of my mental health, or I'm a victim, of my well-being, and that being a victim then puts me in a place where I don't feel I'm in control or I can't do anything about it. And gratitudes are really powerful because what they can do is by nurturing these feelings and putting focus on them, it makes us feel as though we're getting back in control of how we feel and back in control of the thoughts that we have. So if you spend 15-20 minutes every day writing a gratitude list, reflecting on those beautiful things that you have in your life, and reflecting on that feeling, and really just bathing yourself in that feeling, the more you do that, the more consistently that you can tap into that feeling, and the more consistently that you can live with that feeling. And real life doesn't mean that we can live in gratitude 24/7, unless maybe you're the Dalai Lama or someone like that. But being able to nurture these feelings of gratitude are really powerful tools. So gratitude lists, it's really recommended, pick 3 things every morning and focus on them for 15-20 minutes. Because the research has shown that gratitude lists lessen the symptoms of depression over a period of times as short as a month. So these are really powerful tools. And not only, do they help you feel better, but they're really powerful for building that awareness about your inner self, about, your feelings, about the kind of thoughts that you have, really getting to know those thoughts well, getting to know yourself well in that respect. And the last one is kind of similar to a gratitude list. So it's like 3 good things. So at the end of the day, you pick 3 good things that have maybe happened to you during the day. And you try and pick 3 things that happened because of something that you did, something maybe that you were successful in achieving. And then what we do is we note that, and and we write about what that thing was, why it was so successful, and what exactly it was that we did to achieve that. And then we make plans to try and use those things again, in our days to come. And again, by doing these, by making these plans to alter our lives in this kind of way, it generates a sense of hope. It gives us something positive almost to look forward to. And this idea comes from a field called positive psychology. At the end of the slides, I'm going to put some websites and stuff that have got links to lots of resources that you can download, these like worksheets. And another place that you can go and that you can access some CBT worksheets are the Living Life to the Full website. These are really powerful tools, and they're free. Well, some of the tools are free. I think you need to sign up and maybe pay a bit of a subscription to get the full course, which has videos and like about 8 different sessions that cover different topics and themes. But you can get limited access that give you access to worksheets that you can use to start developing this awareness for yourself. So one other really powerful tool that I find. So the thing about the brain is that it loves to work things out. It loves to chew things over. And quite often, today's events can follow us into tomorrow, can follow us into the following day. So if you have things bothering you from your day, take a notepad to bed, and especially if these thoughts are going round and round and keeping you from sleeping, pick up a notepad and write about them, and look at what you can do about it right there and right then. If you have a problem, and there isn't anything that you can do to change it, then you either let it go or you put it down on a to-do list so that you can start to do something about it the next day at the first available opportunity. Making a definite decision about it will allow your brain to let it go. Otherwise, what we tend to find is that with problems, if we have unresolved problems and we don't get closure on them, then our brain chews it over while we're sleeping. Our brain keeps working on it. And if it's doing that, then it's not allowing your brain to do what it usually does through the night. And usually what it does is some things like that. But you can relieve the amount of tasks that you give it by making a decision about problems. And if you decide, either that you're going to let it go or you're going to do something about it the next day, if you can, then your brain will leave it alone and it won't follow you into your sleep. So this is a really powerful way, to try and relieve ourselves of sleepless nights. Okay, so we're now going to look at how the 5 ways of well-being we can put them into practice to tend to our well-being. So getting connected. So I mean, this it's not always obvious, but making meaningful connections with people is a really powerful thing. And unfortunately, the voice in your head that reinforces negative thoughts, maybe about yourself and about your challenging life situations, it loves you to be isolated. It loves you to have you as the only member of the audience. Mental health conditions, like, they thrive on making us feel isolated and disconnected from other people. And, they will feed us thoughts that can make that, all the easier for us. And when your social interactions start to lessen, this in a way can be a great way to spot, engage, and alter your behaviors. If you find yourself making decisions like, I'm just going to avoid people today, or I'm not going to bother anyone with my problems by phoning them or talking to them, then you'll probably also find that you're maybe not the best company for yourself either. So trying to spend a wee bit more time with other people, especially people who you can easily let know how you're really feeling. And I think this is probably even more important just now when, there are restrictions about the interactions that we're having with people. But, remaining connected to our social connections is really important. And social interactions and social connections are probably one of the biggest things that affect our mental health. We're social creatures. We rely on other people, not just, to help us through life, but, we get therapeutic value from being around other people, from interacting with other people. There's something in us that changes when we have social interactions. And so not just at this time of year, not just because of, the COVID restrictions, but because, because we need feeding in that way, because we need sustenance in our social interactions, we really need to make sure that we're doing all that we can to combat that voice in our head that tells us, I'm not going to contact anyone today. So staying connected to people, if anything, have a list of things that you can do during your day that that really help maintain your well-being. And that, top of the list, make it either, talking to someone or phoning someone, or having some sort of interaction with someone close to you. Being active. So, this is, I guess, another easy one that we can do. I'll probably also say that, a lot of mental health tools, they're really successful if we can use them, I guess, in a preventative kind of way. I guess, if If you suffer from severe depression, which means that you spend long periods of time maybe in bed or sleeping, then being active is really difficult to do. So ideally, we try to use these tools as preventative measures. And being active is one that can be quite easy to do. So simple things like, doing a bit of housework, getting outside, doing some exercise, getting into nature, change your surroundings, and you might just be able to change your perspective on things. You're more likely to feel better if you're in beautiful surroundings, and it's more likely to lower stress levels if you're doing some exercise outside or in nature. Even in normal times, about 4 in 10 British adults are so immobile they risk their long-term health, because around 25% are almost completely inactive, meaning they exert themselves for less than 30 minutes a week. An excessive sitting time is really dangerous, not just for mental health, but for our long-term health. It crosses over significantly with risks of inactivity, for example, type 2 diabetes, which has its own distinct impact on our bodies. If we don't use our biggest muscles, most notably our legs, for long periods, there's a cellular effect that makes our bodies less good at breaking down certain fats, which can affect the way they process glucose, which in turn can really affect how we feel, because glucose can make us feel, sludgy and syrupy. And so if you find that, you're sitting around for long periods of time, then try setting an alarm every 15 minutes and stand up and walk around. While the total time you sit contributes to the risks, it is worse when it is interrupted for long periods. So, small steps such as this are really worth it. Research has shown that if people nudge their body into tiny amounts of effort, it can bring astonishing benefits. So the latest health guidelines tells us that 10-minute chunks of moderate activity is as effective as the previously suggested half an hour of activity. Something that it shows is far better than doing nothing at all. Sometimes it's hard to get out and walk about in the snow. Sometimes it's hard to get outside when there are restrictions in place. But if you're lucky enough to have a house with stairs, that's a great way that you can utilize that and keep active. Connecting with nature, if you're lucky enough, like we are across Aberdeenshire, most of us, can step outside our front doors, and within 10-15 minutes, we can be in a place of nature, probably, quite isolated from, either town noise or the humdrum and the busyness of city centre life. Okay, so helping others. There's no surer way of removing the obsession with yourself and your thinking about than, to put focus and energies onto other people and their needs. It might not immediately change how bad you're feeling, but being around other people or doing something with others will give you a reprieve from yourself for long enough to break the habits of your thinking and feelings. During lockdown, studies have shown that we're naturally nurturing our local communities, by communicating more with those physically closest to us. So like maybe our neighbours, if we have the elderly neighbours, this is a great way that we can, seek opportunities to help them, by maybe doing a spot of shopping for them, or, maybe taking out their recycle bins on a weekly basis, if they're really struggling to do this. It's great ways to look for opportunities to help someone else. And like I said, our diet and what we eat can really impact on us. The food we eat can so often determine our moods. If we eat too much sweet foods packed with sugar, then it can make us experience maybe extreme crashes in our moods, or highs and lows, or Lots of sugar can create this like brain fog. And our bodies also use up a lot of energy processing foods, which can be, draining for us too. So similarly, if we're eating too much food high in saturated fats, then we put risk on ourselves for things like heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and heart attacks. And being at high risk of these usually means that our moods and thought processes aren't functioning in a balanced way either. So, really, finding out about, the effects that the food that you put into yourself has, on your moods and your thinking can radically sort of change how you feel. I myself, I'm type 2 diabetic, and I love things like buttery toast, and butteries, they are my downfall. But the thing is that, those things really affect how I feel. And when I stop eating those things, I start to feel clean inside again. And I recognize that's not how, they affect everyone, but it's really shown me just how much food can really affect how I feel on an ongoing basis. So sleep routines. The thing about good sleep is that good sleep is all about good habits. Being able to sleep well is more about the things that we do before we go to bed, just as importantly as the things that we do in bed. There are things that you can do to help you get more sleep. So maybe things like avoiding alcohol close to bedtime, maybe avoiding our devices, blue light, the blue light that comes from our devices, so our phones, maybe our smart TVs, our tablets. These emit what is called blue light, and this blue light inhibits the production of melatonin. And melatonin is the chemical which tells our bodies that it's time to get ready for bed. It doesn't help us to sleep, but it's almost like the alarm clock, or the anti-alarm clock that tells our body that it's then time, it's getting to that time of day where it's time for us to start getting ready to rest. And this is kind of part of the circadian rhythms and such like. But the blue light that comes from devices inhibits that. So it's suggested that, for the last hour or two before you go to bed, not to pick up your phone, or not to pick up your tablet, or, watch too much smart devices, because, this keeps us from going into this sleeping state. And so, starting to wind down, starting to do definite things that help us wind down, having a bedtime routine, maybe like going to bed at the same time every night, getting into good habits around about our sleeping mean that, it can really help our sleep quality. Another one kind of associate to this, and kind of going off in a tangent a bit from the 5 ways, is using social media less. If you're not feeling in top form, then a suggestion might be to restrict your social media use. Although social media is promoted as bringing us closer together, and it is easier to communicate with people, very often the use of and the content of what we see on social media can make us feel a bit lower, a bit more disconnected, a bit more different to everyone else. And when we start comparing what we don't have with what others have, it creates this more feeling of distance and disconnection. And once we start seeing those things, we can turn mild moods into low moods. And it can happen so easily, but, we very rarely recognize it happening now because, social media can play such a large part in our daily lives. And it plays such a large part in our mental and emotional lives, because now we think that social media, or long periods of time in social media, is like normal life. So being aware of how much you're using social media and how much it's honestly affecting you. Another wee tool is in finding meaning and purpose in our lives. You know, even in the midst of difficult times, we can find meaning and purpose. And so an easy way to do this is by getting to know your values. So, you know, sit for an hour with, you know, pen and paper. If you're not familiar with what values might be, then, you know, do a Google search and have a list of them in front of you. Get to know what your values are. Get to know what the really important ones are for you. And sit for an hour and find out what they are, and then think of simple ways that you can translate these into your daily life, into actions. It'll also give you an idea of the things that you enjoy and that you're good at doing, and help you focus on those things, help you focus on the things that you're good at doing. So make a list of these as well, maybe on the same piece of paper, and keep it nearby at all times. Or maybe take a photo of it, you know, on your phone, or have it pinned onto your fridge, so, you know, you can see it on a regular basis so that you won't forget, or you can remind yourselves on a regular basis. So, you know, if you're having not so good a day, you can take it out and use it as maybe as an action plan or a reminder that you have good qualities and can use them to maybe help others. You know, this might not seem like a very powerful tool, but, you know, our inner selves, you know, really thrive and come alive when we get purpose and direction, because it nurtures also a feeling of hope within us. Someone who is looking forward to the future isn't worrying so much about the past and isn't so fearful about the future either. And, you know, this is quite often how, you know, the thoughts in our mind play out, is that we're either regretting things from the past or we're fearful about things from the future. And if we can live from our values, from a value-based place on a regular basis, and keep in mind that and use that for our meaning and purpose, then, you know, it can obliterate a lot of those fears and worries. On to the last kind of wee bit. And this covers a few different kind of practices around about relaxation. But, you know, being able to relax is a skill. You know, it's easy to lose the ability to relax, you know, when our mental health's become a problem, because, you know, being able to relax regularly depends on a strong relationship between the awareness of your mind and awareness about your physical being, how you feel physically, you know, recognizing when you're starting to notice signs of stress. You know, you maybe get tight in your shoulders or in your neck, like I quite often do. And I don't notice that for days and sometimes weeks on end, until I'm really at breaking point. Because, you know, when you're caught up in your thinking and your emotional feeling too much for too long, your awareness of your physical body gets less, because you tend to spend more time in your head, having those, you know, stressed negative conversations with yourself. So, you know, trying relaxation techniques like maybe square breathing, or with, you know, body scans and guided meditations. Exercise is also a really good way for helping you get back in touch with your body again. So just to give you a wee idea about, you know, how mindfulness can really play a part in your well-being. So they believe that the amygdala, which is, I guess, like the emotional center of our brains, and the amygdala is where, you know, we're driven by desires. I guess it's like the a close comparison might be that the amygdala is like a 2-year-old manifest. So, you know, 2-year-olds are very self-centered, and they're very driven by, you know, their emotions. They're very driven by me, and having things their way, and, you know, being very emotionally driven in that kind of way. So our amygdala is like the part of our brains that really dictates those sort of behaviors and those sort of desires and emotions. And left to its own devices, you know, if we didn't have anything to balance that out, or to alleviate, you know, us being driven completely by our emotional cores, then the world just it would just be complete chaos all the time. I dread to think really what it would be like. In fact, there would probably be nobody left. And so they've also found in research that in long-term meditators, especially like monks, Buddhist monks who spend long periods of time meditating, their prefrontal cortexes are a lot stronger than, than I guess people who don't meditate. And it's believed that the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brains that gives us rationality. So it makes us able to see things a lot more rational. And what this does is, I guess it gives some sort of like easing off or relaxation to the amount of drive that we're having with the amygdala. And long-term meditators generally report feelings of being, a lot less thrown about by their thoughts and their emotions. They report being a lot more, kind of in control of their well-being. Just to give you a wee bit of an idea of, building self-awareness is really about building this rationale part of our brains. And the more that we can build this, the more we can have the skill of stepping back from our emotions and our thoughts and not getting pulled into them, and starting to maybe make better choices. So I've got a wee bit video that describes mindfulness and how it can play a part along with cognitive therapy to deal with these sort of things. Okay. These, for those who are tech savvy or like to use apps and such, these are some suggestions for apps that have been recommended on the NHS website. So there's a part of the NHS website that has suggestions for apps that we can use to manage and maintain our well-being, especially our emotional and our mental well-being. I'll give you the link at the end of the slides as well. Some of these are free and some of these are really powerful. I just thought it would be really useful to mention these. So we've came to the end, and I'm going to now hand over.
But the other technique I wanted to share with you is also how to notice your thoughts, and particularly when you've got lots of thoughts going on. So there's a technique that I'll introduce you to, which is called sounds and thoughts, which helps us notice that just as our thoughts come and go, so do sounds. And just as we can't control the sounds, we can't really control our thoughts, but we don't need to be managed by them or defined by them. So how about let's have a go. And when we practice mindfulness or we meditate, and these terms, we call them mindfulness, we call them meditation. Meditation is part of mindfulness. And you might think, I can't do this. I've got to be quiet. I've got to sit there with my legs crossed. You don't have to do any of those. You can be practicing mindfulness out walking. You can keep your eyes open if you want to. I'll never say that you have to close your eyes. But let's just travel hopefully for the next few minutes, shall we? And if I say something to you and you think, I don't want to do it that way, then you just do you and just take some time for you. So David talked about relaxing. Take some time to just pause. And if my words help you, that's great. So just take a moment, and in this moment, you might want to have your feet flat on the floor so that your feet are really connected with the floor. You might want to use your body to send a message to your head, which is perhaps sitting up a little bit straighter, but really comfortable, really relaxed. We're looking to send a message to our body, that we care for it, that we've realized we've got a body and it's doing a great job of getting us through this winter and this pandemic. So just taking a moment, if you can, and if you want to close your eyes, that's great. If you want to lower your gaze, that's great. If you've got a window next to you, you can gaze out the window. And all I'm going to suggest you do is approximately nothing. But how about let's just listen to some words that I'll share with you. So just taking a moment and taking our focus perhaps out of our heads and all the way down to our feet, and really connecting with our feet on the floor. Perhaps really noticing how solid that floor is underneath your feet. Perhaps noticing any sensations of your feet in your slippers or your shoes. And just taking a moment, and we call this dropping the anchor. Drop the anchor of our focus out of our heads and our thoughts all the way down to the feet on the floor. And you might notice this is more difficult than it sounds. You might notice that your mind is getting in the way a bit. You might notice that you're distracted. And that's okay. This is just what minds do. So you might be distracted by sounds. So how about let's just notice the sounds that are there. Just notice whether there are sounds inside your room or whether there are sounds outside, perhaps of nature or traffic. And you might notice that you want to label those sounds. But how about instead we just welcome them in as part of what's happening, noticing that we can't control them. Noticing that some of the sounds might be sudden. Some of the sounds might be really constant, like the ticking of a clock. Just letting these sounds be part of our experience in this moment, and almost as if we're in the middle of this soundscape and we're just experiencing them. And then let's take a few deep breaths in. We can let our focus on the sounds just gently fade away, although you might notice that they follow you. And just take a few breaths in together. So breathing in through the nose. And then opening our mouths and breathing out through the mouth as if we're sighing that breath out. Perhaps feeling your shoulders relax at the same time. So breathing in once more through the nose. Breathing out through the mouth, sighing that breath out. Perhaps you're noticing that your out breath is a bit longer. And that's sending a really strong message to your mind and your body to settle, to soften, even if you don't feel still or calm. And whilst we sit here just breathing, how about just take a moment and notice any thoughts that might be there for you. Perhaps there's thoughts of the day that you've had, of all the things that David has told you about. Perhaps you're thinking of the past. Or perhaps you're fast forwarding into the future, which hasn't happened yet. And sometimes it can be helpful to think of those thoughts as clouds in the sky. So think of your mind as the sky, and your clouds are just the thoughts coming and going. And just like the sounds that we noticed, these thoughts just come and go of their own accord. And sometimes we might like what we're thinking about, and sometimes we might get frustrated or feel sad. But we are not our thoughts. How about we just watch these thoughts come and go? Just like those clouds in the sky. And you might notice that your sky is beautifully blue with just a few white fluffy clouds, or your sky might be grey and overcast. And just like watching the weather, our thought clouds will pass if we give them time and we give them space. And so just bringing our focus back to breathing once more. Taking a few deep breaths in together as we bring this practice to a close. Perhaps breathing in once more through the nose. Breathing out through the mouth. Sighing that breath out. And as we sit here just breathing, perhaps bringing into our mind's eye something that we're really grateful for. Just dropping that question into these final moments of the practice. What am I grateful for? It doesn't have to be big. It can be those seemingly meaningless small things that happen from moment to moment. Someone making you a nice hot cup of tea, or the sun coming out, or a kind word, or the snow. So perhaps just finishing off this practice with that feeling of gratitude for what we've heard today, for the group that we've been able to share with this past hour or so, and also for you, for taking the time to think about how you can look after yourself this winter and during these changing times. So sending some gratitude from me to you as well. And if you had your eyes closed, you can blink them open. Just take a moment, give yourself a bit of a stretch, perhaps roll your shoulders, move yourself a little bit more, having sat there for a while. Give yourself a shuggle and a wiggle. And thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to David, but if you, I've recorded those practices, so feel free to hop onto the Live Life website and do those at your own leisure. But thank you.